How does Spring Security works internally? Let's understand how Spring Security handles authentication behind the scenes, step by step. When you add the Spring Security Starter dependency to your Spring Boot application, something important happens behind the scenes. Spring automatically adds a set of filters into your application, even if you don't write any security code yourself. But what exactly is a filter? In simple terms, a filter is like a gatekeeper that sits in front of your servlets and controllers. It gets triggered before the request reaches your application logic and also after your response is generated. A filter can read the request, change it, block it, or let it through, depending on the logic defined inside it. Now, Spring Security includes many different filters, and each one is responsible for a specific part of the security process. One of the most important filters is the Authentication Filter. This is the filter that starts the authentication process. When the user sends the login request with username and password, this authentication filter is responsible for reading the login request, extracting the username and password, and wrapping them into an object called the Authentication Object. You can think of this as a request envelope containing the user's credentials. Now this Authentication Object is sent to the Authentication Manager. The Authentication Manager doesn't validate anything by itself. Instead, it's like a traffic controller. It delegates the work to one or more authentication providers. Each authentication provider is designed to handle a specific kind of login. For example, one provider may handle username and password. Another might handle OAuth 2 tokens, and another could support LDAP authentication. The Authentication Manager checks which provider supports the given type of credentials using the supports method. Once it finds a match, it calls that provider's authenticate method to actually verify the user's identity. Once it finds a match, it passes the request to that provider's authenticate method. Inside the authentication provider, Spring Security uses something called the User Details Service. This service is responsible for looking up the user from the database based on the username. It calls a method named loadUserByUsername and retrieves a user details object. This object contains all the important information like the actual username, the encrypted password, and the user's roles or permissions. If the password matches and everything checks out, the provider creates a new authentication object, this time filled with authenticated user details, also called the principal. This authenticated object is then returned all the way back to the authentication filter. Spring Security now knows, yes, this user is verified. Finally, Spring Security stores this authenticated user inside the security context. This context stays available throughout the session or request, so that every time the user accesses a protected URL, Spring knows who they are and what they are allowed to do. This is how Spring Security works internally.